I was camping with my husband and his family at a small, remote lake in New Mexico. There were about 10 people in our group and another group of 6 at the next campsite. It was nighttime, and both groups were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, and telling stories, when we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. Neither group had children with them, but we were all positive we were attending to a little girl. We decided to search the area we heard the noises from together. There was a field behind our campsites, and we also a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 feet away from us, making noises. We all agreed this looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny, and white. We made our way closer to investigate, but whatever we saw started backing off as we got closer, and it disappeared into the trees. All night we continued to hear a little girl calling for help as we tried to sleep. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, meaning he couldn't talk, but there were no medical reasons. He had spoken earlier in his life and, in fact, seemed quite normal back then, except for being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the deep south and joined the military when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared a wall and was eventually reported missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a VA hospital emergency room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Ducking, and I've been dead for 10 years. Those were the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust and wearing the same clothes he'd been reported to be wearing the night he vanished. His social security number had not been used, and he had no identification on his person. However, they were able to identify him via fingerprints. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man and that whoever claimed to be him simply could not be. They demanded not to be contacted again. Marion paced all day, every day, moving his mouth that looked like he was talking or muttering, but no sound came out. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open as if he were laughing heartily, but not even a breath could be heard. If I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin. Unless told to stay put, he'd get up and start pacing again. On my last day at that job, the last thing I saw was Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later, I wondered if, all along, I'd been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still don't know.
I was driving across the country with my mom and sister when I was 16 and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested, still, and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop into 100 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station and a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us with 2 young men standing still outside it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days, seen many rest stops at night, and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside, and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I watched the car in front of us, and the 2 men had not moved, not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. They were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out to the car. When they got in, the 2 men slowly turned to look at us while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear to fucking shit, we all saw the same thing. They had eyes dark as pitch and empty. Truly empty. Not black. Not reflecting any light at all. Just a void. We sped out of there and stopped when we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience? We tried to find the place on the map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road and got only confused looks. We've traveled on that interstate since there is no rest stop.
We drove my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through a massive graveyard. We stopped and walked down a hill and came across a little pond. Someone was sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black, and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact that it looked like a man wearing some old style top hat. We stupidly waved and shouted, "Hi." He didn't show any acknowledgement and continued sitting still on the rock. All of a sudden, he jumped to his feet, started running to us on the water, and then vanished into the water about halfway on the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to the car. The car wouldn't start, and we heard something banging on the back. It wasn't a constant bang, but we'd listen to it every few seconds. Nobody was outside from what we could see in the dark, but something was making a noise in the car. I opened my phone and started dialing my mum to come to give us a boost, but I had no service. None of us had any cell service. The following 30 minutes was spent trying to get her car started. No banging was heard afterward, but we felt this heavy pressure around us. Finally, the car started and she hit the pedal to the metal. We sped out of the graveyard so fast. Immediately crossing the gates, all of our phones regained cell service. I knew that someone or something was out there, and it was not an animal or a human.
When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew to the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. Jim, not his name, gets in the car, and we start talking. I had not seen him in 20 years, but he looked the same, maybe a little older. We get to town, and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says, "No, just take me home." Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park, and I figured that was where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn-off, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you again," and he walked off into the night. I went to the VFW, met some of my old classmates, and we started to talk. As we discussed who was coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and dropped him off. Everyone gets quiet. Even the karaoke guy stops and lays down the mic. My cousin is going white as a new t-shirt. Barb. Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral, I was told. I started feeling really dizzy, and I went out to the car to take deep breaths. The local newspaper on the seat, printed 8 years previous, contains Jim's obituary. I still have the paper. Someone take Reddit away from me. I can't stop reading ghost stories.
After we moved into our home, we were told a woman had died at the hands of her abusive husband. She hated men. My dad would wake up with scratches all over himself, and whenever my brother was mean to my sister or me, he would also have scratches on him. One day, my brother hurt our sister. He hit her with something. He had a horrible bloody nose when he woke up later that night. The day we moved out, my brother accidentally broke his twin's arm trying out a wrestling move. He swears that he would have died that night if it wasn't our last in the house.
I was standing in my parents' room, talking to my sick dad then. He was dying of stage 4 esophageal cancer. I got the feeling something was behind me. I looked towards the doorway to the living room, and something about 4'6" and entirely black was peeking around the corner, with its hands on the door frame. I ran towards it, and it slipped back around the door. When I got outside the doorway, there was nothing. My dad was perplexed when I stepped back inside the room when I told him. People who stayed at my house in my dad's final days claimed to have seen it. My mom saw the figure on multiple occasions in multiple places until he passed away. We haven't seen it since. What makes me binge read Reddit's true real-life ghost stories about twice a year when each place I live always has some kind of resident spirit.
Leave a like if I earn it. Subscribe for more daily content, and thank you for watching until the end. And made out.